Welcome to the second episode of the Modern Edge, BetSmart's brand new flagship interview series featuring the bettors, builders, and thinkers shaping the future of sports betting. Each episode explores how data, discipline, and innovation come together to create an edge in today's game. This second episode features Jordan Murphy, founder of BeeBettor, one of the first positive expected value and arbitrage tools in the space. BeeBettor was a pioneer before the betting tool boom began, and after a few years of running it, Jordan decided to shut the product down and shift his focus to educating bettors through content. His unique perspective, builder turned creator, gives this episode an unfiltered look at today's tool and betting landscape. All right, Jordan, thank you for joining us and thank you for being the second guest of the Modern Edge podcast. We have a lot that we want to discuss today, so I think we should dive right in and get right to it. I want to take you all the way back to the beginning, Jordan. What was the story behind BeeBettor, and how did you first get into EV betting, and what inspired the building of the tool in the first place?
Yeah, so EV betting, I think even pre-EV betting, like a lot of kind of new bettors, they think that they know everything just because they watch sports or stuff like that, ball knowledge type stuff. I definitely fell in that category, and I wasn't very good, but luckily I wasn't betting too much. And to this day, can't find the article that I first read. I don't know what it is, but it just kind of explained pricing and like how that works in the EV betting world. And luckily, being a math major, it made a lot of sense to me. It honestly made me feel kind of dumb that I didn't realize it before. And yeah, I kind of just started doing some research into that. I came across OddsJam. That was one of the first kind of resources I used back when they were a lot cheaper. And yeah, it went pretty well. Again, it was like very kind of low level to start, but EV betting really changed my life. And as OddsJam kind of went along, they started to raise the prices. And as I learned a lot more and talked to a lot of smart people in the industry, I kind of realized I had some of my own unique insights and, kind of wanted to share those. And lucky enough, I had a best friend who is a brilliant software engineer. So it's kind of a great merger.
So what exactly were you trying to solve for bettors at the time of building BeeBettor?
Mostly the problems I had with existing options in the EV space was the lack of like customizability. Is that a word? People were kind of just following these numbers on the screen. And even I remember the early days of OddsJam, they'd give you the fair value or stuff like that. And I was kind of confused on, where this was coming from. They always said their algorithms and stuff like that. But there's lots of smart people out there. And if they have their own opinions, why shouldn't they be able to kind of input those into the calculations? And I think that's where the weights and stuff that to this day I believe we started really like was the leading selling point. And then the other side of that is make it very affordable for the average bettor, the everyday bettor.
So the EV customization was kind of what separated you from the other tools that were existing. And now everywhere we look, we see EV customization. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the episode. But what did you learn about bettors through building your tool? And also, if that was working, what wasn't working?
It's a good question. I think that was a very big, again, selling point. That was kind of what we went to market with. And then, like you said, a lot of people followed very quickly. And so it became, and kind of to this day in the EV betting kind of tool space and even just landscape of building, new, better, different tools. And then a lot of it's marketing, which I kind of not was doing a bad job per se at the beginning. I just didn't really know what was working and what wasn't working. I'd like to think at the beginning it was almost like I was like a robot on Twitter, and I would just post an EV play with the screenshot, and it was the same format. It was like a player name, the game, and the stat, whatever we were betting. It did all right. It got some growth. And then I remember one day, it might have been an NFL like primetime game, and I tweeted kind of like it was probably a hot take, and I was just doing it for fun, and people just started, responding and getting engagement that way. And then my next couple posts, I tried to be a little less robotic and kind of learn from that. And I think if you have a personality and you're more than just a tool, I think it goes a long way. And I think it was why BeeBettor ended up growing, as large as it did. It wasn't just a tool. There was like a brand and a personality behind it, and people may or may not have liked it, but it grew the following.
As long as you're authentically yourself, that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, that's all I can be, right?
Absolutely. My final question before diving into our next real segment here is, what did you learn about bettors through building your tool? Because obviously there are very sophisticated sports bettors who do it as a profession. There are others who are very unsophisticated. When you're obviously preaching something like EV betting that some people might take a little bit to wrap their head around, while other people want nothing to do with and just want to bet their ball knowledge, What did you learn about the landscape and some of the betters through building the tool?
Yeah, I think you almost nailed it right there with that kind of intro to the question. I think a lot of bettors, I don't want to say don't care about being profitable, but maybe they don't really understand how unprofitable they are. I think a lot of people treat it as pure entertainment and just almost complete lack of price sensitivity that bettors like have. And I think that's like the biggest challenge of trying to appeal to new EV bettors or people who've never heard of it, of trying to convince them, hey, minus 115 and minus 120 over the long run is kind of a big deal. It can be the difference between you being profitable and not. I think if you tell most, casual sports bettors that, they'd kind of laugh at you and think those are equivalent. People just want a simple kind of intuitive design to kind of tell them what to bet almost. And I think trying to merge those two things is a pretty difficult task, especially in the EV world.
Definitely, because there's a lot of people. It's like the old like casino adage. Like people will go 5 days in a row, lose $500 every day, but then the sixth day they go, they'll win $200, and they'll think that they're up, even though they just lost $500 the last 3 days. See that a lot with casual sports bettors. But I want to take a bit of a pivot here to more of the state of the tool industry. Now, when you first began BeeBettor, you mentioned that OddsJam was a tool that like kind of inspired you, but you wanted to like build upon it. There's tools like OddsJam and like the prop betting world, props.cash, some of like the original tools, and that was like the very early landscape. And now on our website, betsmart.co, we have reviews of 40 plus tools with a queue of, I can't even count how many at this point that are coming onto the scene. But talk to me about what you've noticed from somebody as a builder in the space about the early tool landscape versus the landscape today.
It's honestly insane, is probably the only word to really put on. So we launched, what would it have been? January 2024. And yeah, like you said, the OddsJam was a big player. There's a couple other like Optimal EV, and I don't know, I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but there's a few kind of big players unabated. And we really thought there was an opportunity in the space with, we came in, undercut it a lot, and with the new features. And then I can't remember, like, so January, we started rolling in like March, April, and it seemed kind of like that summer, it would be last summer, it really started to, I don't know if it was just we grew more and we kind of got introduced to more and more, but it seemed like every, couple days I was finding a site that may not look the same, but had a lot of the similar features, right? And so ultimately that's good for the customer, the consumers. They're getting constant innovation and stuff. But as a builder in the industry, it was scary, honestly, to see how quickly it got competitive and how fast you had to be moving to kind of keep innovating and keep the customers coming through the door.
So I want to touch upon a point of something you just mentioned where, of course, having more innovation and more optionality for the consumer is always going to be a good thing. But at the same time, a lot of these tools seem to be overselling themselves and might not actually help bettors in the ways that they claim to be, i.e., making them more profitable, which is realistically the goal of any sports betting tool should be, is to help the person using it make more money. With all the new tools, Jordan, and you and I have talked about this off air, but we can bring it on air, seems to be like a bit of a race to the bottom where they're fighting over just certain small speeds, whether that be latency on live odds or just little things that are becoming so hyper competitive. Is this oversaturation of betting tools actually good for the consumer at this point because of all the micro battles per se that these tools are fighting with against each other on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we've had this type of conversation many times, and it's always interesting to get other people's perspective. And I forget who I was talking to about this. It could have been you, honestly, of like, when does the kind of onus on the consumer trump everything else? I think at the end of the day, a lot of casual bettors want to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they kind of want a North Star or a reason behind the bet. And like you said, a lot of these tools, they don't have to have, doesn't have to be a profitable reason, doesn't have to be because of price. It could be because of stats or, XYZ. And I think at the end of the day, a consumer just wants to be able to, go to bed at night and be like, I placed this bet because of this reason. And it could be a good or bad reason, but is that the tool's fault or is that the customer's fault for believing it's a good reason?
Yeah, everyone's looking for that confirmation bias or the reason to pull the trigger. And that's why also we see on Twitter all the time people claiming conspiracy, blaming the player, saying X player sold my parlay for the night, and not really taking about of accountability. Like the consumer is not taking that. And if the consumer themselves won't, look in the mirror and say, maybe I made a bad bet because the market closed in a different direction, then how is the tool going to be the one to blame? It's also similar to like, even if it's like a handicapper, we go a step away from a tool, they give out a pick, they give out a good reason, say they lose by half a stat. We always see it's a hook, they sold, but the bet was never made under the right pretenses in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's tricky being a tool owner. I feel like when we were running the service, we got into this point of we built the tool like for ourselves or for me, and there was a lot of opportunities to kind of do stuff that I didn't personally believe in that probably would have, appealed to a lot of the masses, but it was just hard to post, last 5 games stats trends if I don't personally believe that means anything. It kind of went against BeeBettor and that, or me, which it was BeeBettor, is BeeBettor. And it kind of is tricky towing that line between being a business and, trying to grow customers and your own kind of standards and ethics and morals and all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. And like we said earlier, you can only authentically be yourself. And if you were pushing some product you didn't love, I'm sure maybe this decision you made, which we'll talk about in a minute, to like shut down BeeBettor could have probably happened earlier, no?
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to talk a bit more on the industry. You mentioned how you feel as if you were the pioneer behind the customization of expected value plays. And now almost every tool I look for that's trying to build the next BeeBettor, the next OddsJam, the next EV tool, they're all focusing on, again, these same features, customization being one of them. Obviously, being able to devig from the right sports books, or maybe it's not obvious for new listeners, like that's actually what you're trying to do. You're trying to use the market as a source of truth to find best bets, and knowing which sports books are better in different markets will help you actually become profitable in the long run. The copycat boom and all the tools looking the same, what does that, like, I guess shifting back a little bit to like the onus being on the customer, like all these tools are doing the same thing. Like what really is the same, or what I should say, what really is going to be the difference? Like, are we in a point of stagnation now? Because it seems like nobody's innovating.
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it goes right to the point of, race to the bottom and all the same features, all the same tools. And it's true in a lot of industries. It isn't unique to, sports betting, EV tool space. And I think the biggest differentiators come from price. If everything's relatively the same, then if one's cheaper than the other, or if you start playing the like percentages game, like, okay, it's half the price, but it has 70% of the features, I'll choose that one. And that kind of just contributes to the race to the bottom, because if price becomes one of the most important aspects and the innovation is lacking, then okay, today it's $50 on average, and 6 months from now it's $25 on average, and we literally get the race to the bottom that we were kind of talking about before.
Absolutely. So, Jordan, let's pivot a little bit because you, a couple of months ago, made the, I'm sure, difficult decision to pivot from product to content creator. I want to talk a bit about that decision, and then I want to talk about the content creation industry within sports betting. But let's start with Jordan. What really prompted you to say, finally, I want to make this pivot?
Yeah, so there's a couple big things that went along with that. BeeBettor has always been a 2-person team. It was looking like that was going to get cut in half. And so that is obviously a huge reason, losing half the team who's doing half the work, or if not more, with the whole technical aspect of it. That obviously hurts. But then it goes back to everything we just talked about with the race to the bottom. There's so many uncertainties in the EV betting space, especially with the introduction of the big beautiful bill in the US. It's kind of all in jeopardy. The copycats, that race to the bottom we talked about, I did look for another kind of founder to, keep it running, but all those kind of external factors that we talked about being the race to the bottom kind of led me to believe, how much longer do we really have in this game? And is it worth it kind of not restarting, but taking a step back to try and get back to where we were, just for the industry to kind of not really either exist or just provide enough value for us to continue running a business.
And it makes sense. A number of reasons we spoke about, but I want to pivot now to what you're doing now, as that's obviously going to be important. And my question to you is, what are you trying to bring to the space as more of a content creator?
What I'm trying to bring as a creator is all the silly stuff that I wasted, I'd say easily months, maybe years of my life, kind of learning the hard way because I had no one. That is what I really did at BeeBettor with the tool. When I wanted to get into this industry, I didn't create something. I didn't have the idea to create a tool. I just wanted to provide, value and kind of lessons to, new bettors, old bettors, just kind of share my insights because I thought they were at least a little bit of value. I think being on the content side of that, I have a little bit more range to talk about things, outside of the scope of what BeeBettor was. Like I said, there's many features that BeeBettor didn't have. And now not being tied to my own tool, I can go and explore different tools and different companies and products and really, learn about, all the new stuff that's happening in the industry and then try and teach people to the best of my ability without being reliant on one tool.
Absolutely. And we can also just, put our cards on the table here. A lot of this content in the sports betting game is horrible. You have creators who don't understand the betting fundamentals. They are using anything they can to get clicks and they don't know what they're doing. How are you going to start combating that with your content? Like, for example, I know you've been posting videos using tools and showcasing how to EV bet, what that actually means. But what are other things that you plan on doing to kind of, it can't really change necessarily people's minds who don't want to have their minds changed, but there is definitely a subset of bettors that are probably looking at certain tweets and certain content and saying, this can't be right. Like, I was there. I used to Venmo my bookie every single week, losing money, and had to take a second and be like, there has to be a better way to do this. So what's next in your content journey, and what are you trying to, teach that currently is definitely not being taught through some of the bigger, more popular accounts?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the whole kind of gambling content space as it currently stands. And this, we've talked about, the content side of things. The wrong content almost seems to be the one that blows up and gets really popular because honestly, a lot of EV betting is boring. It's not boring if you like enjoy it, but as a casual gambler who's been betting, 10 leg touchdown parlays, to go and, grind out your 3% mainline edge, I don't know, it kind of turns a lot of people off. And so this goes back to the early days of BeeBettor, and I'm sure a lot of betting tools in general, is how do you convince this average casual gambler that price matters, price sensitivity. It's honestly, it makes no sense to me. But again, I'm kind of on the other side of the coin here. And so it's been like the 2-year question of the whole life of BeeBettor is how do you show people that this matters? And I think that's the biggest kind of hurdle. And once people see it, even if they just have their eyes open to it, I think it leads to a whole kind of discover phase of the whole EV betting landscape. But if you can just convince them of price, not even like price sensitivity and knowing the difference, just like that they exist and it matters. And that's where I really want to start. I tried to start as bare bones of like, what is EV betting, and kind of take it along a journey of, variance and sample size and, okay, what is a sharp book? And hopefully just kind of start at that, chapter 1, level 1, and kind of evolve through that and kind of see where the content takes me and, where it branches off to.
Absolutely. And like we were talking about, you can't force somebody to like learn something that they aren't interested in learning. I have a friend who I was with this weekend. I've been talking to him about betting for half a decade, and he's married to DraftKings for whatever reason, while there could very easily be a better price in just 2 clicks of his thumb at a different sports book. So, Jordan, what would you say from your BeeBettor experience and your experience now in the content game? Where do you really think the casual bettors get confused? Is it they just don't want to learn, or is there like some invisible barrier that's like preventing them from taking this next step?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, where is the kind of barrier to learning this? I think a lot of it is variance, but in line with variance is sample size. I think, and this goes back to kind of content that blows up, is very much get rich quick. And I think that's kind of a overarching theme in general society. No one wants to, like I said, grind out that 3% mainline edge. They want to bet $5 and win 100 grand. And when people Photoshop tickets or, do whatever they do on that, that's going to blow up because people kind of see that dream, even though it's not a reality. The reality is it's a grind. And I think when people make the switch from, trying to do that, they'll go and they'll try EV betting for a day, maybe if a week if they're lucky. And if they experience any sort of negative variance, which is probable, then they're turned off to the idea because it's not working, even though in a week you could experience the worst variance ever and be down so much, or you could have the greatest run of your life. There's a stat, not a stat, kind of a metric that I had back when we were running BeeBettor, the site, and we saw based on saved plays, if a user had over 2% ROI in the first 3 days of using the site, I forget the percent, increase in chances of not churning as a customer, but it was ridiculous. Whereas if a user, experienced over 10%, negative ROI, they almost certainly churned. And it's just like you have such little time to capture the customer that if it doesn't click or they don't experience that good variance, they're probably just going to go right back to what they were doing before.
Yeah, if they don't see a difference, they're gonna, chalk it up to this doesn't work, and they're gonna just say, especially what makes it difficult too, Jordan, is when you're dealing with EV betting, you're often gonna see expected value on something like a LeBron James under points, and if you recommend somebody who's a ball knower only to bet LeBron under points, he ends up scoring 50, they're immediately gonna say, "What the hell are you talking about? This doesn't work."
Yeah, it's funny, and you probably have lots of experience with this of, just talking to casual gamblers of like, oh, what do you like tonight? And it's like, I don't know, some ugly underdog in a primetime game, and they're like, oh, here's all the stats and this quarterback this, and I was like, well, I played it because it was, plus 100 on whatever book, and it was minus 130 everywhere else, and it's so slim. Again, to the casual person, it doesn't seem like that big of a reason, and then when you have no reason you bet it makes zero sense to a lot of people.
Absolutely. Then, like, again, in some cases, they'll like call you out as the one who is uneducated. Like, I'll give you a prime example. Just a couple of days ago, I bet McCaffrey under receptions because there was an 8% EV. Guy has 4 receptions on the opening drive and, of course, flies over the number. And I have, some of the people who I was talking to, friends, saying, like, how the hell could you do that? Of course, they're always going to filter the McCaffrey. And all I could say back was 8.4% edge DVIG to Penny, Circa, and FanDuel.
Yeah. EV betting will make you look stupid in your friend groups a lot of the time, but maybe you can show some P&Ls and it'll gain a little bit more respect.
I'm gonna say at the end of the day, P&L is a verified picket. One of those things will actually showcase, like, I know what I'm talking about. But Jordan, what has the transition been like? I mean, it can't be easy to go from, of course, you were doing the marketing and building the brands, doing that simultaneously, but now that the brand is different, it's more of a content educational brand. How has the transition been for you?
It's been difficult, to be completely honest. I think we've had conversations about content and creating it in general, and you've taught me a lot in the short time that I've started this, and kind of shown me how much of a craft it is. And I think, I don't want to say disrespect because that feels really harsh, but I didn't appreciate content creators enough before this. You watch your TikToks and stuff, and I think they just put up their phone and they take the video, and even just getting to listen to you talk about your process of making videos was like, it is a craft and you really have to put a lot of effort. And I've spent more time behind the camera writing out scripts and planning than I actually have. Once you get on the camera, it's not too bad unless you're having a stuttery day or something like that. But yeah, I think I just didn't appreciate the grind and the craft and the art of content creation. And so I think I was a little naive going in, and now I gotta get down to it and really, really embrace the grind again. And it's been fun to try and learn a new skill and new stuff like that, but it's been hard.
Just like EV betting, all the skills you're learning daily, they're going to compound over time. The small edges you find, scripting, editing, whether it be, post-production, etc., those things will compound. And I think it's a relatively obvious question, but I do want to ask it to you again. Why was content the right next chapter for you?
Yeah, we've kind of gone down that already, and just the fact that it was a lot of what, not necessarily content, specifically, but just the education aspect was so much of my day in BeeBettor. And I really got to a point where I enjoyed seeing, the zero to complete of someone coming in and not knowing what devigging or, what a sharp book or all these like quote unquote dumb questions that are obvious to experienced people, and then kind of teaching them that, them learning, and then seeing them in the Discord or on Twitter or something like that, months later, and kind of educating new people and seeing that journey that I went on, and then being able to share that with new people, it was really rewarding. And so with content, it makes sense to, focus on that and kind of share that same journey and kind of retake it step by step again. and try and, pick up as many people along the way and just focus on education, like I touched on before, not being tied down to my own tool and being able to explore a plethora of tools is only going to make the content easier, better, more informative, and just better for the customer.
Absolutely agree. And that's, a lot of what we do, as you know, and as a lot of our audience knows as well. There's a lot of unique differences between different tools, even if they do offer, similar feature suites or even somewhat of copycats. There are going to be unique things that you can learn from each person who's behind the scenes of them and within each of the own technologies themselves. But Jordan, let's wrap up with our closing question. It's a bit corny, but it's the question we ask to everybody at the end of every show, and it's the BetSmart question. I need to ask you, what does it mean to you to bet smart?
It's the $1,000,000 question. Even if it is a little bit corny, it's still a great question. I think to try and, put it concisely is price. I wouldn't even say sensitivity. I would say awareness. I think when you are placing a bet, if you just take, it'll take more than a couple seconds, a minute to just reflect, okay, what is this? Where is the market in relation to this, single bet that I'm placing? What does this mean, percentage wise? We might be getting a little in depth there, but I think to kind of just, start is the awareness of, okay, where can I get the best line? Is this a good line? What makes this a good line? What makes this maybe a bad line? I think just thinking before you place bets sounds, kind of silly, but if you're aware of what the kind of odds mean and, what you're kind of getting yourself into, I think it's a great first step, and you don't even really need to understand it necessarily at the beginning, but just that awareness piece, be aware of price is, how to bet smart.
Price rules everything, and I really appreciate that answer. This was a great interview, Jordan. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to follow all things, follow Jordan on all platforms at BeeBettor, and also make sure to subscribe to the BetSmart YouTube channel, as well as click that follow button if you're listening on Apple and Spotify podcasts. For more episodes of The Moderate Edge, we'll break down what's actually happening in the sports betting world. Thank you again, and we'll see you guys next time.